Anyway, so Demetra is coming here today to talk about global warming and what we can do. And I know my garden certainly needs help. I look at all the rain coming in and I'm thinking, I have brooks out there that have never been there before. What do I do? How can I change my garden to tolerate all this? Hopefully, with her interest, she will be able to tell us something that we can do. So take it away, Demetra.
All right, thanks, Ashley. Hi, everybody. I don't know, it's very awkward not to be able to see people, so I'm going to pretend I see you all. My name's Demetra. I own Gardens by Demetra, which is a landscape design company. I mostly install gardens for homeowners, but I also have a lot of business clients starting, that kind of thing. And I work on a very large scale and I work on a small container gardening scale. I love all of it. Matt, do you mind just jumping to the next slide? Thank you. So that's me. And then let's jump to the next one too, please. Great. So Ashley, first, thank you very much. It's very nice to be part of this long lineup of gardeners. So 12 years ago, when I moved up here from New York, I'm from here originally, I did a similar talk for Sustainable Winchester. And at the time, I really thought that home gardeners could turn back time in terms of climate change. I no longer believe that. I think we've hit a critical point. So they're kind of, I'm not going to be depressing, I promise, but my talk has transformed. Can you hit the next slide, please? So, and then the next one. That's what we're here to wonder, right? So it seems to me there are two ways of looking at it. One is the big picture. And I think gardeners should, clean up and go vote. You should teach, you should lead. I know that the Lexington Field and Garden Club is doing that, that kind of thing. Then the next slide, the smaller picture is what do we do when we get into our own gardens, right? So there are a lot of things we can do, but the main thing I want to inspire you with is we have to kind of hold the line. We have to hope and work very hard for a global response to climate change. And in the meantime, we have the power to protect those that need the most protection as gardeners. Matt, if you would, please. So the next three slides kind of go quickly and it's pretty obvious. We've got songbirds, they're in terrible trouble. I know a lot of you have probably paid attention to this. Between habitat loss, cats, lights in tall buildings, that habitat loss and climate change is really doing a number on our songbirds. Next slide. Pollinators, our native pollinators need protecting. If they disappear, we have to do their job, and I don't want to do their job. I want them to do their job. They're really good at it. Next slide, please.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And then our plants. This is a Franklinia. It's from I recently moved, but I have this old garden that I'll reference a lot. And this tree I planted there, but it's no longer existing out in the wild. So we've lost hundreds and hundreds of species, and we continue to lose more every year, and we need to do our best to stop that. So next slide, please. So my goal today is to inspire you all on this day. I'm looking out at the snow and we're talking gardens, which is great, to create a resilient landscape, to create part of a wildlife corridor, and to add beauty to your own garden. So we're going to talk about how to get there. So next slide, please. And I'm going to get my dog. Excuse me. Henry, come here.
Otherwise, that dog is going to keep barking like mine does.
Right.
So he'll start up.
He's sure that he has to go outside. He doesn't. So there are a bunch of steps to get to what we're really going to talk about, right? And I'm going to go quickly. I am happy to answer any questions, but I'm guessing that the viewers know most of this stuff. Number one, most important thing is your soil. Keep on with the slides, Matt. We'll just move right through. So to create healthy soil and then to keep it that way, you're using compost. You're leaving the leaves. The more organic matter that gets into your soil, the more it acts like a sponge, holds water, distributes nutrients to all the roots that need it. If you haven't already committed to being an organic gardener, do so. And like if those yellow signs, that say poison, those shouldn't be on your property. And question the mulch you use. Next slide, please. Nope. If you're using this stuff, you're wasting your money and you're hurting your soil. There are a lot of mulches. Mulch generally is a good idea, but this kind of mulch that's dyed red or dyed black, you have no idea what that is. And it's some of it is fresh wood, like old Christmas trees or something, but most of it is old, garden steps made of treated lumber, or playgrounds, or pallets, dry wood that has no nutrients. So question the whole mulch cycle. Okay, next slide, please. So then the second thing, once you've wrapped your head around soil, is we as homeowners especially are so used to thinking that water is bad and we want it all to go away. We actually don't. Next slide, please. We want to keep our stormwater on our property because we want to keep replenishing the water deep down, the water table. Lots of ways to do that. Rain barrels. If you don't have rain barrels and you have a veggie garden, they're just a great way to gather 60 gallons of rain and of water in a minute. They're also a good way of reusing or repurposing an existing plastic item. These big kind of cool food grade plastic containers that can look really cool. Rain gardens are a wonderful option where you construct a bowl and you design it so that when water runs off from storm drains, et cetera, from downspouts, you can create a beautiful garden. Permeable surfaces. If it's time to dig up your asphalt driveway, consider, are you able to put a gravel driveway down? Plant more trees and shrubs. They like water. You want them to use water, make it so that you can have more. If you're using the irrigation system, make sure you're working toward the roots and not just wildly spraying, especially during the sun. I'm sure most of you know that. You don't want the water to evaporate, and you also don't want to sunburn your plants. Doesn't rain on sunny days, so you want to kind of mimic nature there. And also use xeric plants where you can. There are lots of plants that don't require a lot of water, so they're a really good option to either add or change your garden to include. Okay, next slide, please. Here's just a quick fun fact on rain gardens, which I really believe in, because as Ashley pointed out, there's a lot of rain happening. A rain garden that's 10 by 10 feet versus a healthy lawn of 10 by 10 feet absorbs 30% more water. It just takes it, it holds it, and you design it so that you plant in the middle and then up the sides, depending on, and there are tons of native plants that love this situation. So it's just a great design tool. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, size matters. This is rule number 3. Reduce your lawn. This is on trend. People are starting to do this. If you've started, that's great. Keep going. And if you haven't, really consider it, because lawn takes a lot of resources and often lawns rely on chemical fertilizers and on herbicides and pesticides, which you're kind of a sociopath if you're building a pollinator garden and then you still have that yellow sign on your lawn. Don't be a sociopath. So, it's not right. So lots of beds around foundations, trees along paths can be expanded. There seems to be this strange rule with a lot of the new construction that's happening in Lexington, where there'll be a long path up to a front door, and then this strange patch of grass, and then the foundation planting. That in and of itself could be a beautiful garden. So there are lots of ways to do that. Another great clue, think back to the fall when you were raking leaves off of the lawn. Where were they mostly falling? Maybe there's a tree out in the lawn that would love to have a bed under it, and then the leaves can fall and be your mulch. So just think about those clues. If you really want your lawn, but you're willing to kind of get a little funky, you can use low mow grass, you can use clover instead of grass, or you can add clover to grass seed. That fixes nutrients, nitrogen in the soil. It's really healthy and good. You can try a different ground cover entirely. Moss if you're in the shade, thyme if you're in dry sun, liriope, not native, but that's okay. You can try other things. And also I would ask everyone to adjust their notion of what a healthy, beautiful lawn is. Again, if you're using stuff that requires that yellow sign, I would maintain that's not a healthy lawn, and nor is it beautiful. So a beautiful lawn to me does have weeds in it, like clover or even violets. So anyway, I would encourage you to think that way. Next slide, please. So here's an example. You can see, I pulled this off of a website, a realtor website. It's lovely house. It's a baby foundation garden. I see some issues. There's no native plants here, but also, do you see that little patch of grass between the path and the foundation garden? It's bizarre to me. And then there's just this huge lawn, and you can just imagine it would be so beautiful with plants. Okay, next slide, please.
Poor planning too, that tree standing in the middle there.
Exactly. Like there are just so many mistakes, and that you see that all the time. I'm sure everyone knows that. So now number 4, materials really matter. You're maybe putting in a fence, you're buying some furniture. Everyone wants to be outside now. We're having parties. We're living so much outside. We're building garden beds for vegetables. We're putting decks on. We're adding patios and stone. Ask yourself, Matt, next one, please, if what you're going to put on your property will ever leave the planet Earth. And if the answer is no, I really strongly suggest you don't use it. So plastic fencing, next slide, please, and vinyl fencing, it will never, ever leave. And the PVC fencing is not even a reused product. So it's really bad. Next slide, please. And furniture. I mean, this is just cheap stuff, but even high-end furniture that's made of vinyls and plastics, go for high-end wood. Next slide, please, if you can. So this is just, cedar fencing. The best thing to do, next slide, please, is to leave it unpainted and unstained. Of course, some people are going to want to paint it. Some are going to want to stain it. But the best thing is in many, many, many years from now, that will actually turn to dirt, right? It'll become soil. Or you can eventually, put it in your fire pit that you've put up in your patio. But a cedar fence is beautiful. It ages beautifully. It's kind of New England, and it will leave the planet Earth. Next slide, please. And furniture, we all love our Adirondack chairs. They are making a lot of them now with a reused, repurposed plastic, a lot like decking. And I really recommend that decking product. But if you can use wood, it's just be mindful about it. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is my favorite rule. Be messy and be lazy. See what I did there with the bee?
No,
This is all about creating a habitat for our pollinators. If you don't know that we're losing our native pollinators, and a native pollinator is one like a native plant that's grown here in the Americas for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, along with songbirds, and they've all grown up together. So they need each other. And we are losing native pollinators at a terrifyingly rapid pace. So it's very important to protect them, to hold the line. So in the fall, people get really excited about their fall cleanup. And then in the spring, we all get really excited about our spring cleanup. I would beg you to do your own research and understand that these cleanups are, first of all, badly named, because cleanups imply that something's dirty, right? Like leaves are treated as if they're going to sneak into your house and drink all your wine. They're not. They belong in your garden beds because they fell from the trees that are above the garden beds. That's food. So in the fall and in the spring, leave garden stalks, leave the leaves, just get rid of all of the gross stuff like the tomato foliage. Matt, I know, had a bumper crop of tomatoes. You want to throw that out. You can't even home compost that. Same thing with peony foliage. No one's ever taking my peonies away from me, even though they're not native to here. But the foliage that doesn't have, disease on it, leave it, because all of those pollinators will crawl into the stalks to overwinter, fall into winter. In the spring, they'll climb out, but they'll leave their baby behind. And then sometime in the summer, their baby's going to emerge and be the whole next generation of important bugs. So leave stalks at 2 feet if you can stand it. I beg you. Oh, can I see, you can, sorry, hit the slide. I don't have the power of it. Leave the leaves, Wild Seed Project. Write it down or return to this slide when you can, when you're viewing it on YouTube. They're doing some wonderful work, and this you can actually download as a sign and put it in your garden. And that allows you to help educate in a very gentle way. Next slide, please. Birds will eat, and these are just, let's go through this one, the next one. See the ferns coming up through the leaves, and then the next one, please. And that's my baby Amelanchier with a big fat robin sitting there, and you can see the leaves. I'm just inspiring you. This is not ugly. It doesn't need cleaning up, in my opinion. Next slide, please. And then snags. If you have a property where you have a tree that's dying or is somehow endangering your house, see if you can leave 20 feet, 15 feet. If you can, over time, next slide, please, you'll see woodpeckers all over these snags. And next slide. And then you'll see chickadees. They're like, ooh, thanks, woodpecker. And they'll move in and raise babies. Next slide, please. Okay, and then if you leave your garden stalks, you don't deadhead, you don't clean up, you'll have birds eating the seeds far into the fall. And that's what you want to do. That's a resilient landscape, and it's joining what we need to build, which is a wildlife corridor. Birds don't live in one little place. They need to be able to really roam. Next slide, please. There's another example of a goldfinch. I'm not sure if that's Monarda or whatever, but you can just see them. They're in there. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was number 5. Be lazy, be messy. Embrace that as best you can. And then number 6, so we're almost there getting to plants, but this is really important. Make way for the natives. Invasive species are where I break my own rule of not using Roundup. I would never use Roundup to get rid of lawn. I dig it out. But if I have invasive species that are killing woods, a full-grown tree, or preventing other plants from thriving, I'm going to kill them. Next slide, please. There's a wonderful list on the Audubon website that is an exhaustive list. My list is not exhaustive, but I'm giving you my main most hated plants. Norway maples. If you have a huge Norway maple and you can afford to get rid of it, and you don't rely on it, like it's not your only shade tree, cut it down, turn it into firewood. It's a beautiful tree in Norway. It doesn't belong here. In 10 years, without paying strict attention, what you get is what you're seeing on the screen, which is a monoculture of just Norways. And they crowd out every other native keystone plant that we need.
Yeah.
Horrible. Next, and they grow quickly and fall quickly, so they're no good.
The water.
They will deprive all your other plants of water. They're just terrible. Bittersweet. a lot of people try to get picky. They're like, oh, but they're so pretty. They're not pretty. There's nothing pretty about this plant. A full-grown oak tree, if it's covered with this vine, if it covers the canopy, in 2 years, that oak tree will be dead. And an oak tree is the most important keystone species in our area. So there's nothing pretty about it. It's illegal to cut them and take them and decorate with them. So don't do that. And if you have this on your property, you can pull it if it's small, but if it's unpullable, cut it. And then like a surgeon, paint or just spray with Roundup on a still and sunny day. And that is using a poison in a surgical way to kill essentially a cancer. Next slide, please. This is buckthorn. Oi, with the buckthorn. This stuff is wrecking our woods. If you have if you're up against conservation property or you've got a wooded area, look for this plant. And if you have it, you can test it by pulling a little twig off and smelling it. And if it smells like an old cigar, that's buckthorn. Get rid of it. Pull it, cut it and paint the stump, do whatever you need to do. It's a horrible plant. And the berries, you'll say, oh, but the birds like it. They do, because they're taking over what should be there. So the berries are edible, but they're not great for the birds. Next slide, please. This is burning bush. I don't care if you love how it looks for 4 days in the fall when it turns red. It's just an awful invasive. And it's just starting to move into woods and it becomes a monoculture. So if you can stand it, get rid of it. If you can't, then really be prepared to control it because it flourishes here. And there are other beautiful plants. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the next one. So these are barberry. The next slide too, please. There's Asian barberries, there's common barberries. First of all, they're really mean, vicious, wildly thorny plants. So who needs them? Secondly, they are terribly invasive. Again, they're illegal to grow in the nursery trade or sell. Same thing with burning bush. Get rid of them. The other thing that I learned is ticks really like the soil around these plants. For some reason, ticks lay their eggs, so get rid of them. They're relatively easy to dig out. You just have to wear armor. Okay, next slide, please.
That's the hard part.
Right. And then this is my final most hated foe. If you've got a panda, that's good. But otherwise, Japanese knotweed will not be, it's sort of a bamboo. It is very hard to vanquish. People think it's really pretty and the bees love it when it's in bloom, but it is wildly out of control. It will shove anything out of its way. Nothing can compete against it. So if you have a small patch, do whatever you can to get it out. However, if you have a big patch, it's tricky because if you're just pulling them, they love newly disturbed areas. So the more you pull, the more they kind of move in and they're like hydras. So there's a lot of research being done on the best way to kill it. A lot of people cut it, and inject Roundup right into the hollow stem. It can be done and it takes persistence, but it's worth doing. Okay, next slide, please. So now it's time to plant. So we're going to talk quickly about native plants. And again, native plants are important because they're absolutely essential to our native pollinators and our native songbirds. They evolved here. They're tough. They can take what New England gives them, even if New England is giving them way more than what they grew up getting, because climate change means the heat is hotter, the storms are stormier. Nothing is as predictable. Even when I was a kid growing up here, I knew there'd be a thunderstorm every afternoon for 2 weeks in August. I knew that July, there'd be hardly any rain. And I knew I could count on spring would bring the right amount of rain to get everything growing. And I knew winter ticks would be killed because it would get cold and there'd be plenty of snow. We can't count on anything anymore. So natives are the most important plants to get into our garden because they're tough and because they're what our birds and our bugs need. There's an 80% rule. It's really 70%, but that's right on the borderline. So I aim for 80% and I either get there or I fall just a little short. So I'm safe. So the 80% rule, Doug Tallamy, if you don't know about Doug Tallamy, I have it in a slide later. He's fantastic. And he talks about a research project that was done in outskirts of Philadelphia in the suburbs where they were looking at chickadees. It's a common songbird that we all love, and looking in neighborhoods where there were 70% native trees, chickadees were okay. Their babies were born, raised, fledged, and survived. But where there were 69% native trees or less, a lot of those nests had dead babies in them. Or what's even sort of worse, they had dead babies surrounded by all sorts of bird seed that people very kindly put bird seed feeders out. But of course, babies need baby food, and that means caterpillars. So native plants offer that. And that's why if you go for 80% of all of your plants being a native New England plant, you're going to be part of a wildlife corridor, which is great. And then finally, design. We can get to design in many, many ways, and everyone has their own way, including the sort of where does this fit here kind of thing. But one way that's kind of fun is to think about designing for birds. Next slide, please. So, okay, so let's go through this. This is a pollinator garden that I put in, I think, a year and a half ago. Lots of plants, not all native, but most are. Keep going, please, Matt. And you can see there's just a lot of variety. And next slide. And things are developing. This was all taken on one day. Some nice Joe pie. Next slide, please. And then this is that fern picture again. So I'm just trying to inspire you to think about plants in community. You can see these ferns are all coming up. There are also those little native lilies. And there's, I forget which tree they're under, but that's a pretty crowded situation in another couple of weeks. Next slide, please. Here's our native orchid, pink lady slipper, which I had thriving in my garden for many years. I moved and I left it behind, it broke me. Next slide, please. And then, do you remember what these are called? I forget, I always call them the ghost plants, but those, this is.
I think Indian pipes.
Indian pipe, that's right. So this is growing up through a bed of moss. This is taken in the Fells Woods, but I have clients who have this on their property. These are wonderful. It's just such a wide variety. Next slide, please. And then this is Pipsissewa, which I like mostly because I like to say it. Also taken in the Fells, also have a client who has these.
That's pretty.
Oh, they're lovely. So that's just sort of a reminder that we have so many wonderful native plants. Let's use them. Let's get excited about crazy native plants that we don't even know anything about. Let's get away from what we've been doing for all these years, right? Do something new. But when you design for birds, what you're trying to do is create, you can imagine being a bird and being way up in the sky and you want to get all the way down to the ground, and you need to do that safely. So you do it in a series of steps. You go from the highest tree down to a mid tree, to a lower tree, to a high shrub, mid shrub, lower shrub, high perennial, all the way down to the ground. Next slide, please. And that's where, you can see this. This is Long Pond in the Fells. Yeah. I love this picture because it shows the great plant diversity and how a bird can move safely from the sky to the water. I mean, it's not ground, but it's still the same principle. Next slide, please. And this is Garden in the Woods. I hope you all know this place. I hope you all go to it often. It is gorgeous. It's a real treasure, and it's all native plants. So it's a real inspiring place. Next slide, please. And this is, I happen to love this. This is from the Maine Botanic Garden. If you haven't been, you must go. Have you seen the trolls? It's incredible there.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but this is another example of how birds and humans love a design that goes from high to low or low to high. There's no ground showing except a little tiny bit. Beautiful. And natural stone quarried from very close to their garden. Next slide, please. This is my old garden, a little messy, and you'll see some things that I'm a little embarrassed about, but I want to point out dead ahead is an oxydendron, and right behind it is a fringe tree. And there's a bunch of other plants in here too, the hydrangea, there's a magnolia, there's sedum, and you can see the ground cover is vinca, which I don't do. Don't do that. Learn from me. That was there. I allowed it to stay, and I wish I hadn't. But you can see there are huge canopy trees all the way down to the ground. Can you go to the next slide, please? And this is that same oxydendron in the fall with that fringe tree behind it, the chartreuse. And then there's an oak tree starting. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So oxydendron, Lexington has some of the most beautiful oxydendron I've ever seen. And they're even planting them as like street trees, which is bizarre to me. That's a great plant. And it's so much better than a burning bush. Next slide, please. So this is a garden that we installed last fall. And it features some baby trees and some not quite so baby trees, natives, a lot of native shrubs, tons of pollinator plants. And guys, I'm here to tell you, this landscape doesn't use poison, and there are so many options for bees and other pollinators, and I see zero.
Oops, sorry.
Here. Nope, check that. I see one on this Nepeta. If you guys don't know Nepeta, you ought to get to know it because it's gorgeous. Yep, there's a bumble. That is, I swear to God, the only bee here. Please stop spraying. Now I see a couple more. But please, when you look in this neighborhood and you start to understand what's going on here, and you realize all these people are spraying their lawns, they're spraying against ticks. And I mean, my God, this place should be, I should be hearing the buzzing. Please stop spraying. Let's save the world for our kids. Bye. Okay, thank you for playing that. So that day was shocking to me. I did go back a couple weeks later and it was buzzing, thank God. But it tells me that because this house is relatively isolated, surrounded by houses that are not planting natives, are not committing to being organic, etc., there's not a wildlife corridor here. So I planted a resilient garden. I planted many species, many natives, but unless some of the other neighbors get on board, it's an island, and birds and bugs need a corridor. So it's sort of a cautionary tale, yes. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's talk about plants. There is a long, wonderful list of native plants. There's no way I can talk about most of them, let alone hardly any of them. But I did create a list of my favorites. Plants I know are tough. They'll make it. They'll offer a lot to bugs and birds. Okay, so let's jump right in. Next slide, please. We're going to start with the upper canopy. If you can plant one tree next year, I beg you to plant an oak tree, red or white.
Doug Tallamy.
Yeah, it's a gift to generations to come of humans as well as birds and all those bugs. So oak trees, I think, are the most glamorous, fabulous plants native ones. Don't go get an upright English oak. Don't do it. Okay, next tree, please. That's a sugar maple. I happen to love the bark. We all know what a sugar maple is. It's a keystone species. It's so important. Plant it if you love it. Next one, please. We're also the land of hickories. Hickories offer a tremendous amount to mammals as well, so do oaks, as birds and bugs. And there are all kinds to choose from. My favorite is shagbark, but there are beautiful hickories. Next, please. And white pines. White pines are enormous. You can keep the canopy controlled, but if you've got room for a white pine, go for it. Obviously, it's an evergreen. Don't put it where it would block your winter sun. You don't want to make that mistake, but it's a wonderful plant with a huge importance for birds and bugs. Next, please. Okay, so those are just the top. Now, already I'm hearing you people go, what about hemlocks? What about this? What about that? There are so many great plants. So please don't think that if I leave one off, it's because I don't like it. That's just not true. We're getting into the mid canopy. So these are river birch. Next, please. And this is a tupelo or a black gum. Tupelos are gorgeous. If you can have two of them, it's even better. They make a berry that you might not even notice, but the birds do, and on their migration pattern. Next, please. And then this sort of spans the lower and the upper. This is a choke cherry or Prunus virginiana. And you're thinking, what? She wants me to plant one of those 60-foot gangly things that grow on the side of the road. Actually, these grow to 25 to 30 feet. They're beautiful. Next slide, please. And they make these berries, not one will hit the ground because the birds love them so much. There's a named variety, Canada Red, that is lovely and they grow quickly. So they're a wonderful option if you want an ornamental tree, but you want it to, move along. Next slide, please. So this is hawthorn. I love hawthorns. Next slide. Amelanchier. These two trees have a lot in common in that they make berries, but amelanchiers are harbingers of spring. So their berries come in the summer. And again, not a one will land on the ground. The hawthorns, the berries can persist for a while before the birds eat them, but the birds do eat them. Next slide, please. And now that's oxydendron again. It's one of my favorite trees. We're getting, an older oxydendron is certainly a large plant. It's not a small plant, but it takes a very long time to get there. So it can be treated more like a lower canopy level. Next, please. Oh, fringe tree, Cynanthus virginicus, one of my favorites. Delicate, lovely smell. Better if you've got two of them. Chartreuse in the fall, lots of bugs. So the birds like it too. Next, please. Okay, and next. So now we're heading into, next, please. Thank you. We're heading into shrubs. So we're going up into tall shrubs and then moving down. If you don't know that we have an American evergreen holly, this is Ilex opaca. Plant it, it's gorgeous. And there are named varieties. Some have yellow berries that the birds really like. So it's really a worthwhile plants to have on your property. Next, please, are probably viburnum. Yep, viburnums. If you don't have them, you are missing out. I only plant things that will put on at least 2 shows because we're in New England and, I don't have time for lilacs. I love lilacs and maybe I'll plant one, but lilacs don't do anything beautiful in the fall. Excuse me. Viburnums are gorgeous in the spring when they leaf out, then they bloom, and then they make these berries that persist into the fall, but the birds will eat them. They're a fabulous plant. Make sure you get native plants, and they like community. So don't plant one if you can help it. Try to plant 2 or 3. Next, please. Clethra. Clethra likes wet feet, can handle some shade, smells like heaven, and the pollinators just arrive. And it's a beautiful plant. You can use it, in a wetland, in a rain garden. You can use it in great masses or just 1 or 2. Next, please. And Lindera, do you know this plant? This is spice bush, and it attracts butterflies that lay the spice bush caterpillar, which are adorable. Lindera is a wonderful plant, also best, this is it in the fall. Best used also if you can pattern with it 2 or 3, but if you just have one, that will do the trick as well. Really important plant. Next, please. And then we all know Ilex verticillata. This is one of our deciduous hollies. You see it if you're driving on Route 2A, you know, growing in the woods, growing by the side of the road. Great wetland plant. The birds love the berries. This is a plant that allows me to introduce the concept, though, of be careful when you buy a native plant if it's been hybridized. And if they're bragging, the berries persist all through the winter. That means that birds hate the berries and that there's no reason for the birds to go to the plant. So it's like plastic. So be careful of named varieties. Many Amelanchier have named varieties that are going to be fabulous, but a lot of these Ilex verticillata varieties are ones you want to avoid. Next, please. Sticking with the species when possible is really good. And that's where Garden in the Woods and the plant store come in handy. Ilex glabra, evergreen. It's one of our hollies. This is it in bloom. It's beautiful, covered with pollinators. Then it makes a little insignificant blackberry that the birds will eat. Beautiful plant, tough as nails. Next, please. And high bush blueberry. This is another really good alternative to burning bush because in the fall it turns beautiful shades of red for longer than 4 or 5 days. And it makes these berries. And you can see the little bell-shaped flowers are actually designed for this one particular, I think it's called a mason bee, if I'm remembering correctly, that pollinates it. Honey bees do not pollinate high bush blueberries. They don't fit. So it's really an example of how they evolve together and how important blueberries are to the existence of this pollinator. Next, please. Okay, Aronia. This is an interesting shrub. A lot of people don't know it. It's wonderful for wetlands or close to, you know, little streams. And those berries do persist, and they do so because the sugars are compacting into the winter. And then the birds will finally eat them and get a little drunk. And it's actually funny to watch. I used to watch it in New York quite a bit. Next, please. I think we're in perennials. Great. So next, please. So again, perennials. I mean, I could talk for 4 days on perennials, right? Joe pieweed. Next, please. And milkweeds. If you haven't figured out how important milkweeds are, next, please. You know, you'll catch up. Milkweeds come in a variety of colors. Next, please. This is one of my favorites. The smell is heavenly. And next, please. And it is the only plant that monarchs can lay their babies on. It is the only plant. So without milkweeds, monarchs die. Monarchs are dying in this country. They're dying around the world. And New Englanders are really trying to do something about it. But we're a little behind. So if you don't have milkweed in your garden, add it. Next, please. And it's also wonderful for all of the other pollinators. Vernonia or ironweed, fabulous plant. Next, please. Actea, great for a shade garden. It's also called bugbane. It smells lovely, and the pollinators love it. Next, please. Blue lobelia. This was my garden with some Joe Pye behind it. Blue lobelia will seed, but it will never be like that campanula that just makes you cuckoo. It's a really beautiful plant. And the pollinators, you can see there's a bee tucked in there. Next, please.
We have that.
And asters. So next, please. If you don't mind, we don't need to watch the movies. I'm concerned a little bit about time, and you can always go back in maybe and watch them on the YouTube. But on the right is an aster called Lady in Black. And I will tell you, this garden where I planted this, the bees were all over it. And then there's Solidago. Actually, do you mind playing the movie with the Solidago, the yellow flower?
And this is
Thank
why
you.
Solidago is so important. And by the way, it does not give you allergies. Plant it. It's beautiful.
Right. So Solidago, when I say, oh, I'm going to plant goldenrod, maybe I'm creating a pollinator garden for someone. Oh no, that makes me have allergies. It does not. It is pollinated by bees. It is not pollinated by air. Wind is what is doing that to ragweed. That's what's killing your eyes that time of year. But Solidago gets a bad rap, and it's one of the most important plants for pollinators. It's also a very cool object in the fall to look at, the flower stalk. And it's one of the places where a lot of pollinators will overwinter. Very important. Next, please.
And this is why Solidago.
Sorry.
That's okay.
It's glitching. There we go.
There we go. This is one of my favorites. It's an anemone. This one is Virginiana. There's also Canadensis. There are also Japanese anemone, which are gorgeous, and they bloom in the fall. They can be pretty aggressive, but pollinators love them. But these are two natives, and they act as a ground cover. One is a little taller than the other. Absolutely beautiful. Bugs love them. Next, please. And then, of course, there's our native columbine. Next, please. And Tiarella. And I end it at Tiarella because I'm trying to move down to the forest floor. Tiarella is a wonderful ground cover. It doesn't, like Vinca, it doesn't nudge out everybody around it. It plays very nicely with others. Another one that I forgot to put in here, and I wish I had, is Phlox divaricata, which is that like bluish purple phlox. And if you can get it, especially with Tiarella, it's stunning. Rabbits also really enjoy it, however, so it can be a challenge.
Well, that definitely is a challenge.
That's all a challenge.
Yes.
Next slide, please, Matt. Okay, so speaking of challenges, there are a couple of things that I would challenge you to do. No mow May. I did it last year because I've embraced being lazy. No mow May was fascinating. I had all these flowers popping up in my lawn that I would never have seen if I had been out there mowing. So give it a try. It's worth doing. Even if you decide, one swath you'll leave unmowed, give it a try. Leave the leaves. I'm begging you, please do that. Don't chop them. Don't mow over them. Leave the leaves, not on the lawn. I get it. You can't do that, but you can put them into your perennial beds, certainly under your shrubs and tree borders. Do it, unless they're walnut leaves, which you don't want to do because those have a certain amount of that poison in them, that the walnut roots put out, or if they're diseased, but you understand. No fall cleanup. I challenge you to do no fall cleanup except for diseased foliage or whatnot, and a minimal spring cleanup. It's really important to wait till the temperature is 50 to 55 degrees for a solid week before you go out there. And I know how hard it is to wait, but if you must, be gentle, use your hands. Don't go out there with blowers and rakes. Remember, there's a whole generation of pollinators waiting to be born, and you can erase all of that so quickly because we're so big. And transform some of your lawn into habitat, into a garden. Can you do it? And educate your community if you can, however you can. It's so important that people understand what's at stake, and I hope that I've made that clear. Next slide, please. Oh, so this is resources. Doug Tallamy. If you don't know about Doug Tallamy, get to know, listen to his podcast. He is fantastic. Garden in the Woods, Nasami Farm is their grower out in Western Mass. Get a truck and go shopping. www.grownative.org, wonderful organization. They do a lot of lectures over the winter at the library in Cambridge, although now it's all, this, but that's okay. Audubon, Wild Seed Project, American Meadows, I buy a lot of seeds from, and they have a lot of seed mixes. Be careful with seed mixes. A lot of the seed mixes for a pollinator garden have invasive species in them, like, the pretty white flower that's all frothy that you see in the fields.
Queen Anne's Lace?
Queen Anne's lace. I mean, for heaven's sakes. So be careful about your seed packets that you're buying. Native Plant Trust, that's part of Garden in the Woods. It's a fabulous organization. And then if you ever wanted to reach me with questions, that's how you can reach me. And this book, which I forgot to write on there, Native Plants of the Northeast, fabulous, fabulous resource. And it's by Donald Leopold. I use this book all the time. Okay, next slide, please. I think that's it. Thank you. And now there are questions and
Yeah, there are some questions, and you've given us a challenge, which is great, and so forth. And let me see where my I like having the challenges. Where did the come back chat? There you are. Okay, Rebecca wants to know, you say to use gravel. This was on the driveways. How do you keep the weeds away?
Oh, you kind of don't. What you're going to do is use what I used is a crushed gravel. You wouldn't use round, that you might use for a patio that are soft. So you want it to kind of click together so it's not flying around. And then you're going to use enough of it so that weeds will take a while. But ultimately, to keep weeds away, you either pull them by hand, you can use, a high dose of vinegar, which does work.
Yep, it does.
Yeah. Some people, like if you're doing a garden path, you can put cardboard underneath and then some gravel on top, but I wouldn't recommend that with a driveway. You're going to use a lot more crushed gravel on a driveway. So
I have like a gravel path around the side of my house, and there's I get a lot of pine needles that fall in, and then I guess that turns into dirt, and then weeds grow out of that, and I'm not sure what I should do about it.
Yeah, you just gravel can end up being a wonderful growing medium, so you just want to keep it as clean as possible. I had the same situation in the house I used to live in. So you just clean it off, and every 2 years or so top dress it with a little bit more gravel just to keep it looking neat and tidy, because the gravel will eventually go down. But vinegar works. Some people swear by soapy water and salt. I don't like salt. I don't want to put salt on my property.
I don't know, it's sort of like drainage. So I'm not sure, the water goes out towards my front lawn. So I'm not sure if I put anything like vinegar or whatever, if it'll, end up on my.
You would do it on a dry day, and by the time the vinegar has done its job, it's gone. It wouldn't wash out and kill your lawn.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, and the next one is from Vicky. Is our gardening zone expected to change?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm growing things that I wouldn't have been able to when I was a kid. So yeah, it is. And it's actually allowing us to invite trees and shrubs that are happier, maybe in the DC, Virginia area. We're going to be able to have more of them here. But similarly, white birches, don't even bother. We haven't been able to plant white birches here in New England for probably 20 years.
Right.
Because it's too warm, they get diseased and they die. So yeah, it's changing. Should we be planting for the next zone? I don't know. I think it's worth exploring. If you know Broken Arrow Nursery, they're in Connecticut, and they have a lot of, oh, come on, Demetra, this is what happens. They have a lot of interesting plants that are right on the edge, and they're starting to find that they can grow them. So they're a nursery to watch and to learn from.
I also, with the same question, we could probably start our planting for vegetables in some of our annuals earlier.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't know about that because we're still, because everything is wilder, it's colder. If we're going to get a cold snap, it's going to be even colder, or
Yep.
we're going to get this, torrential downpours. So I don't know that it's worth trying, but you have to be able to pivot and go, oh, I got to plant, I still put peas in on St. Patty's Day. So I don't know.
Well, my husband always says, you gotta wait till Memorial Day. And I'm going, no, we can do it earlier.
Patriots Day on the peas.
Patriots Day in the peas, he says.
Which comes first, Patriots Day or St. Patty's Day?
St. Patrick's.
St.
St.
Patrick's is in March. Patriots Day is in April.
Right.
So
So
it's all
you
one
plant
place.
on St. Patrick's Day. That's right. Yeah.
Sally wants to know, does bittersweet have bright orange roots? I pull it.
It
and
does.
It
Yep.
does.
You got it.
And you can pull it, but get
You
it when
can
it's done.
absolutely pull it. But if it's those big, wide, they spin around a tree,
Yeah.
you're never going to dig that thing out without a machine. So just cut it and spray or paint Roundup on the root. And be persistent. This will take years to do.
Right. I've seen the trees just absolutely broken by that bittersweet. And
They kill trees. That's a terrible vine.
yeah. Macaulay would like to know, can you suggest a native street tree with
Mhm.
maximum height of around 35 feet? A pyramidal shape would be best. Thank you.
Okay. Pyramidal shape. I would look at, this isn't quite a pyramidal shape, but I would look at the sweet gum variety slender silhouette. It might be too columnar. A pyramidal shape at 35 feet might be a tupelo, but a tupelo would need to be planted where water, I know in Belmont, there's a place where there are street trees that are planted below the sidewalk and water is pitched into them, which is very smart urban design. Amelanchiers are a really good street tree if you can find them single stem. I'm not sure they're going to get up to 35 feet, but that might be your best bet. Natives. There's a hornbeam, but that's going to get a lot bigger than 35 feet over time. If it's a lot of, that's what I've got. I would look at Amelanchier. If it's 35 feet, look at tupelos and see if you think that would make it. If you can, because that is a fantastic tree. And the chokecherry, Prunus virginiana, would probably be really good because it's rounded, but it's not out. And it gets 25 to 30 feet. I hope that's helpful.
He came back with, are all the trees and shrubs you mentioned usable in our zone? I looked up the fringe tree in Sourwood. They seem to suggest they're more viable in Pennsylvania and South.
No, they'll grow here. I have them, I plant them all the time. Oxydendron are a tougher plant to grow. You have to be, all trees, when they leave a nursery, they usually have a 7-year chance of living because people don't plant them correctly. And the nurseries now, because it's mass produced, how they're fall and burlapping, their trees are being planted too deeply. But no, you can plant all of those.
Okay. Jill wants to know, what do you recommend as a mulch? Wood chips
Okay.
or is it layer of compost?
Stop, Ophelia, my cat. Okay, I love wood chips. Raw wood chips are a great mulch, but a lot of people don't like them because they're not pretty enough, which I get. But raw wood chips are great for 2 reasons. They're free. You can often have a tree guy dump them on your property, but you have to want a lot of them. Or you can go to your local, if you have municipal composting, which I think
We
Lexington
do.
does.
Lexington has a
Yeah.
lovely one.
For free. And the reason those are great, now there's one caveat, but they have a lot of fungi and microorganisms that exist and that will find their way into your soil. And that's really important. However, because they're raw wood chip, you never want to mix that into your soil, let's say when you're planting, because the raw wood chips are going to grab the very nutrients that the plants need, and they're going to hold on to it. So as a surface, raw wood chips are fantastic, and they'll, last for a long time as they break down. Other mulches I love is a leaf mulch you can buy from Cavicchio in bulk. If you've got landscapers, they can bring it in. Sweet peat you can buy in bulk at Mahoney's in Winchester. Fantastic product, beautiful. None of these things are dyed. I don't like dyed mulch, and every other bark mulch, with maybe one exception, has dye in it. They'll say it's aged hemlock or it's aged cedar, but it's been hit with some dye. So I wouldn't use it. There is in Woburn, on the Reading Woburn line, there's a place called Russell's, and they have an aged bark mulch. And I'm betting like Wagon Wheel probably does. And it's not dyed, but it's dug out of the woods in Maine somewhere. So, it's some old pit somewhere. But the best mulch are the leaves from your own garden, because they're free and all those creatures are underneath there.
Yeah.
So,
And
if
your
you,
recycling.
exactly. And if you really want your garden to have that neat and tidy look, and I totally get it, then rake, if you can, your leaves away gently and compost them. Just put them in a corral, that you can make with hardware cloth or whatever, so that all that overwintering stuff can still survive. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, this is Jill, if I can just follow up on that. So when you're mentioning about the wood chips and not wanting to mix them into the soil, if you are laying down compost, then do you want to rake off like last year's wood chips before composting?
Yeah, so if you're adding, do you add compost to your gardens every year?
So I actually just moved to this house to Lexington last year, and I have extensive gardens here, and I have gardening experience, but this is, it's a new challenge. And I definitely want to start kind of adding to the soil, because I don't know what's been done to it previously and how tapped it is.
Yeah, so first I'll tell you, if you don't know about Black Earth Compost, get to know Black Earth. They can bring you bulk compost, and it is the best product I've ever used. So that's number one. Number two, I would not mulch before I do that. I would put compost down when the earth has warmed up. Don't do it too soon, because you trap cold and ugh. So wait, put your compost down, and then you can add mulch, or you can wait and, use leaves in the fall. But if you're adding a lot of compost, then you're going to have a lot of weeds, because they're like, ooh, compost, they'll want to grow.
Okay, we got one more and then we should really wrap up. Rebecca says, I think it was Doug Tallamy or another lecturer said to leave poison ivy because that was good and native, but won't the bird spread the seeds and it get out of control?
Yeah. So poison ivy is native. It's not an invasive. And here's the thing, you might not like it, but it will never be an invasive plant in New England. However, poison ivy really likes climate change because it likes carbon-rich environments. So, you're like, really? It couldn't make tomatoes happy? No, poison ivy. So you shouldn't, birds love poison ivy. It's one of their most important, those berries are very important to them. Yep, you will get poison ivy. And I am ruthless about pulling poison ivy in my yard because I'm not interested. But if it's off in the woods or something, I would never mess with it because it belongs there. Same thing with Virginia creeper.
Yeah, belongs out there, not close to you.
Right.
So it's time to wrap up. It's past 2 o'clock. You can see what a challenge you gave us. We haven't gone past 2 o'clock for a while.
Oh,
You
I'm
were
sorry.
great. I love your enthusiasm. I mean, it's marvelous. You'll be a great speaker for the Lexington Field and Garden Club. I think
Good.
everybody should hire you. So thank you, Demetra. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. I don't think we're on until March. and it's pruning. March 9th will be pruning, a second lecture on that. So take care, stay warm, and stay out of your gardens for now.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the winter. Get your seed catalogs ready. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Demetra and Ashley.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciated that.